3 months after her husband died, a financial advisor walked into her living room and quietly sold her a product that would lock away most of her retirement savings. She didn't know it then, but that single signature would cost her nearly everything she thought was safe. The worst part? She trusted him because he had attended her husband's funeral. His name was David Harper. For years, widows across 3 states believed he was helping them protect their futures. But behind the handshakes, the sympathy cards, and the reassuring smile, a very different story was unfolding. If you're retired, if you've lost a spouse, or if you've ever wondered whether financial professionals always put your interests first, stay with me. Because what happened to these women wasn't caused by a market crash. It wasn't caused by inflation. It wasn't caused by bad luck. It began with trust. And that's what makes this story so frightening.
Margaret Wilson was 72. She lived outside Columbus, Ohio. For 46 years, she had been married to Robert. Robert handled every financial decision, every account, every bill, every investment. Then, one cold February morning, Robert suffered a heart attack and never came home. For the first time in her life, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers she didn't understand. Insurance forms, statements, tax records, retirement accounts. The fear was immediate, but the loneliness was worse. Then, 2 weeks later, the phone rang, and everything changed.
Mrs. Wilson?
The voice sounded warm, professional, concerned.
My name is David Harper. I worked with your husband.
Margaret immediately relaxed. Someone knew Robert. Someone understood their finances. Someone could help. David arrived carrying a leather briefcase. He brought flowers. He spoke softly. He listened. He even shared stories about Robert. For the first time since the funeral, Margaret felt less alone. But something else was happening, something she couldn't see. David wasn't simply building trust, he was becoming indispensable. And once that happened, the sales process began.
A week later, David returned, this time with charts, graphs, and alarming predictions. He warned about recession risks, market volatility, bank failures, economic uncertainty. Every headline Margaret had been seeing suddenly felt connected. David leaned forward. Then he said something she would remember forever.
Your husband worked too hard to leave your future exposed.
Margaret nodded. The statement felt caring, protective, responsible. Then David introduced the solution, a special annuity, safe, guaranteed, protected. At least, that's how it sounded. What he didn't emphasize was what was hidden in the fine print.
The paperwork looked endless. Margaret didn't understand most of it. But she trusted David. After all, Robert trusted him. At least, that's what she believed. So she signed and moved nearly $650,000, her life savings, into the annuity. For a moment, she felt relieved, protected, safe. Then, 6 months later, a problem appeared. A small one at first, but it would expose everything. Across town lived another widow, Susan Parker, age 68. Susan had also worked with David, and she needed money for emergency surgery. Simple enough, or so she thought. When Susan requested access to her retirement funds, the answer shocked her. Withdrawal penalties, restrictions, surrender charges, thousands of dollars lost simply for accessing her own money. She called David. His explanation was confusing. The paperwork was complicated. The answers never seemed direct. And suddenly, Susan started asking questions David didn't want asked. Susan wasn't the only one. Soon she met another widow, then another, and another. Different towns, different backgrounds, same advisor, same product, same promises, same surprise. One woman couldn't help her grandson with college expenses. Another delayed medical treatment. A third postponed moving closer to family because accessing their money carried devastating penalties. The realization spread slowly, then all at once. These women had not purchased flexibility, they had purchased restrictions, and many hadn't fully understood what they were signing.
The complaints eventually reached regulators. Investigators began reviewing records, phone calls, sales documents, commission structures. That's when another uncomfortable detail surfaced. The annuities generated enormous commissions, far larger than many alternative products. Investigators weren't asking whether annuities themselves were bad. Many are perfectly legitimate. The question was different. Were these products truly suitable for vulnerable widows, or were fear and grief being used to drive sales? The answer would become the center of the investigation, and David's world began to unravel. Margaret watched the news report from her living room. David's name appeared on screen. For several seconds, she simply stared, silent, frozen. Then she began crying, not because she lost all her money, most of it was still there, but because something else had been taken, trust. She replayed every conversation, every reassurance, every promise, and a painful question kept returning. Would Robert have wanted this, or had she been targeted during the most vulnerable season of her life? That question haunted her more than any financial loss. Today, Margaret tells her story openly, not because she wants sympathy, but because she wants others to slow down, to ask questions, to get second opinions, to remember that trust should never replace understanding, especially when retirement savings are involved. Financial danger rarely arrives looking dangerous. Sometimes it arrives carrying flowers. Sometimes it speaks gently. Sometimes it attends a funeral. And sometimes it looks exactly like someone trying to help. If this story made you think of someone you love, or reminded you of a decision you're facing right now, take a moment. Have the conversation. Ask the extra question. Because the most expensive financial mistake isn't always the one you make out of greed. Sometimes it's the one you make because you trusted the wrong person at exactly the wrong time.